journey, questions arise like fear and faith, which are doubting lives. They're doubting lives. Here is your promise in this crossroads, it still stands. Your word is a light unto my path, it's my land. 'Cause you are real, your word is true, the hope that I am walking to.
All right. Alrighty. You ready?
I'm ready.
You set? You got some things to say?
Sure.
Well, welcome to this Juan Time. Today, my guest is a friend of mine. I've known you for about a year now. We've been hitting some workouts and getting familiar with, how you kind of present yourself, I guess. I'm very impressed, like I was telling you earlier, very impressed in your vocabulary and I guess how you get your ideas across. I am joined by Tom Arbaugh, aka Glory for those initiated. The reason I wanted to have you on is for what you've brought up before, some of the line of work that you do. You are a chaplain at one of the local hospitals here in Arizona, right?
Correct. Yeah, I work for Chandler Regional Medical Center and for Mercy Gilbert both.
Oh, okay. Very cool. And then when I asked you to come on, you're like, well, what do you want to talk about? Which one of my businesses, I guess. So I guess my next question is, what else do you do?
Oh my goodness. So I'm involved in a couple of different things. I still teach adjunct, one online class in Kentucky. And it's usually just one per semester. I teach biomedical ethics, and that's usually for RN to BSN students. So it's within the same line of work that I do as a chaplain in the hospital. I work for a company called Apartment Life. It's a actually international, because we're in Canada now. So we're international.
There you go.
We're an international nonprofit that places teams within an apartment setting to build organic community. Is essentially what we do there. So I work as a director with that company. And then I work for the hospital system as well, mostly on call and picking up shifts. So I'm still working PRN for the hospital system. Let's see. That's pretty much all I'm doing right now. Sometimes I drive for Lyft if I'm stuck up in the north side of town and I want to use the carpool lane. I'll turn on the app and
nice.
Get a ride down to the East Valley.
So you preface the addresses and you're like, which is kind of on the way?
Yeah. You could drop a pin. So I just drop it right by my house and I just hang out there until I have a ride. And then it takes, if I'm coming from way up in Cave Creek,
yeah,
it cuts my trip in half because I get the HOV lane.
You have to, dude. So I had to take, not defensive driving class, but what's the other one? The next level. Because I ran a red light late one night. No, it wasn't good. It was a quick yellow light. That's what it was. What is there's another class that you have to take anytime like you run a red light or you are convicted of manslaughter or something like that. Like you're in an accident, somebody dies. You have to take this other class. I forget what it's called, but there was a guy.
Like a driver's ed, like a...
It starts with the C. Survival school. No, it's totally not a C.
Class for criminal drivers.
Criminals, yes. So there was a guy in there and he was just like, yeah, I'm here just because I take the HOV lane. And it's like, well, do you think that's right? He's like, I don't care. I've been taking it for, 13, 14 months. And I've been cited twice or something like that. And so he's like, the way he brought it up was like, if I get caught in the HOV lane, it's going to cost me X amount, but also it allows me to get to work sooner. And so he was like just rattling off all these pros on why he breaks the law. Right. And I'm like, okay, some of that reasoning I can somehow get behind and I see your logic, but we're supposed to be abiding by these rules, right?
Right. Like I said, I teach ethics, so I'm not sure that that's how ethics really work.
Not ethical, totally not. And the guy was just like whatever about it, and the instructor, this older lady, she was just like, like just kind of surprised, as we all were. And it
Right.
was just like, okay, well, she's like, I'm not here to counsel you. I'm just here to tell you what the facts are, what the ethics, I guess, of the driving are. So I'm glad to hear that you are an independent contractor at that point to get yourself home faster. Yeah, that's a way that guy should be doing it. I should link you guys up if I can find him. I'm sure he's taken another class by now. So I guess just take it right back. Give me a little insert of, I was just asking, I didn't know you were from California, Northern California. So I guess kind of what was that like? And then how did you get into, because ultimately I do want to talk about your chaplaincy.
Yeah.
That's referred to. So a little insight, man. Let me get to know you. I've known you for a year, but we haven't actually got to get to know each other.
Cool.
So
Yeah.
using this big platform as my way.
So I grew up in Northern California, a little town called Grass Valley. It's about an hour northeast of Sacramento. So Sacramento was like the big city to me. Like,
yeah,
we'd once a year we'd go down there to do like back to school shopping and go to the mall. Like that was a big deal because in my town there's like a JCPenney's and a Kmart, and that was it. So we're talking legit small town, like 5,000 people. It's an old Victorian town. So I grew up there in a family of 6. My dad was the county sheriff of our county when I was growing up. He was a deputy and then the elected sheriff of the county.
Whoa, what was that like? Were you rebellious?
I was.
Hey.
Yeah,
who would have thunk it?
Yeah. If you were to interview me 20 years ago and said, "Hey, you're going to be a chaplain in 20 years," I would have been the first to laugh. So it was not on my radar at all. I was not a person of faith.
That is so awesome to hear. That big kind of turnaround. Because I told you earlier my beliefs, and I'm kind of the opposite. Like I was really good, and not now that I'm bad, but we kind of, I guess, role reverse. So
sure.
So 20 years ago,
20 years ago, me, I was
what kind of names would you have called yourself?
Oh,
we don't need to get into that. Yeah,
well, so I grew up in kind of a very privileged Leave It to Beaver type of family, but the experience of having a parent who was in politics, kind of everybody knew us, everybody knew our name, and so the pressure of that
sure.
There were lots of reasons why, but yeah, in my early teens, I just kind of went hog wild. So I was a very, very different person. I dropped out of school when I was a sophomore. I never even.
Wow.
Yeah, if you were to look at my high school credits, I have maybe enough to finish freshman year. Wow. And so even going to college, like, I mean, I have 2 master's degrees, and if you would have told me that 20 years ago, I would have laughed at you. I was a high school dropout and kind of hit rock bottom. I had a lot of friends that were involved in stuff that was going to lead to prison or death, and even now looking back, some of the people I knew, a lot of people that I knew are either locked up for a long time or are dead now because of the choices that they were making. So when I left, it was kind of a point in my life where I was like, if I don't get out of this town, I'm going to end up in prison, or I'm going to end up dead. So I fled. I was running away when I went to college. That was kind of the only excuse that I had at the time to be able to get out. So I went to the city, probably an hour and a half, 2 hours away, Chico.
Okay. Yeah.
And most people who go to Chico go there to party, but I went there to kind of sober up and get my life straight.
That's how hard you were going. You go where people party to sober up.
I was swimming upstream, man. The year that I went there, they filmed Girls Gone Wild twice in our dorms, and I was like,
oh my God.
It was a party school.
Yeah.
And I distinctly remember the first week that we were there, everybody's going around, inviting everybody to go to all the different parties and go to all the different things. And I remember somebody knocking on my dorm room door and saying, "Hey, we're going down to this raging party down here." And I was sitting there for a minute, and a little bit later, one of the campus ministries knocks on the door, and they're inviting everybody over, for cheese and crackers at the campus ministry of the college. And I distinctly remember sitting in my dorm room kind of going like, the decision that I make tonight is
Here,
yeah. It was like, whatever choice I make right now is going to determine a path for me. And I didn't end up going to either that night, but it really was a point where I was like, I'm going to make some changes in my life.
Yeah.
I really was in a broken, hurting place when I got there. And so it was a very distinct, pivot where I was like, I'm going to do something different. So most people go off to college and lose their faith. I went off to college and found Jesus. I became a Christian while I was at Chico State of all places. And,
wow.
And most people, that's where they make other changes and other decisions for their faith journey.
That could be kind of like I guess to kind of compare that to binge drinking or party drinking in the US versus other countries where the age limit is a little bit lower. So you kind of get that out of the way. So to me, it's like you got your life experiences kind of like out of the way, which most people, you might not even recommend it for yourself, but
right.
I guess that period of you, as you're becoming an adult, of you just like kind of like caution to the wind was shortened,
right?
Because you experienced that at a younger age.
Yeah. And my self-destructive behavior was it was not just rebellion and just freedom. I mean, I was a broken, hurting person, and so like a lot of it was to process through that. So it took years of figuring out who I was and what I was about. But yeah, there's definitely like a piece of that. Like I don't wonder, what would it be like? I've been on that other side.
Yeah, you've seen the ugly side of that glamorous life.
Right.
Yeah. Burning yourself out.
Yeah. I mean, I would say rock bottom. I was in trouble with the law, and I was in trouble just in life in general. I had just a string of broken relationships. I hurt a lot of people. I was a really angry kid, and so.
Where I could imagine just with your father being a sheriff and in the political scene, I would hope to hear that you guys have kind of worked through that by now. Yeah. But I don't know, right?
So I grew up with probably the most patient father. I mean, so most people have an image of a police officer where there's just this kind of angry and aggressive, and my dad's the polar opposite. I mean, he drives everywhere listening to classical music 5 miles an hour under the speed limit. He's just not a posturing type of person. Sometimes that would just aggravate, that would aggravate me because he would not get worked up. I mean,
you wanted a reaction.
Yeah. And he was just not, he wasn't somebody who reacted. He was very thoughtful. I like to tell folks, my dad did a very beautiful job of always letting me know that the consequences were going to fall, but that he wasn't going to stop loving me and that he wasn't going to disappear. So like he'd go and he'd let the consequences happen. But he was right there. It was a true unconditional love. And I knew that of all of the privileges I've had in life, I'd say that like having parents that would show up unconditionally. And I mean, that's got to be an embarrassment, right? He's a political figure and he's got to go to the courtroom and,
But that's godly.
Yeah.
The way you explain that, I mean, wow.
No, he was full of grace. And really like the nice thing is he didn't bail me out. Like I've told people, one of the best things my father did for me, I got arrested when I was like 18 or 19 for getting in a fight. And I called home and I'm crying and and he says, well, court's on Monday. I'll see you then. He didn't bail me out.
Yeah.
That was my choice that got me there. And so I was there but I knew that I was never going to be abandoned.
Yeah.
He let that kind of roll how it was going to be. And,
I mean, he said, see you Monday. It wasn't like your court's there and then, we'll see you when I see you or something.
Yeah. But he, some parents would rush down and get a lien on their car and get somebody out by midnight. And he's like, no, 72 hours and there's probably a good thing for him. And truly it was because it was this tension between, like I said, natural consequences and unconditional love at the same time. So yeah, I had remarkable parents, both mother and father, very, very patient. So yeah.
Very cool, man. That's fortunate, to still have that after, explaining to me what you kind of, how you behaved.
Yes. Statistically, I shouldn't be here. And statistically, most people don't go on and get an education and get careers when they have the background that I do. So,
Yeah.
I would attribute that to having a loving community that was willing to put up with my crap.
And that we all need that sometimes, for sure. Oh, not sometimes, most of the time. Okay, so you get approached and you get offered to go to this rager where you know that they're filming like some Girls Gone Wild, and then cheese and crackers at the ministry.
Yeah.
So you say no to both, which is probably a solid move, right? It's like, I'm thinking like you're on The Bachelor or something and you got two ladies and you're like, well, I'm gonna say no to both and kind of go home and think about it, right? So yeah, hindsight, I would say, oh, this is where he went there and it was like happily ever after. It's like, no, you took a pause,
right?
And you're like, okay, let me analyze this. So the next move. So how do you become a God-fearing Christian?
So I was still a little rough around the edges. I would say that in the moment that I made a decision, and I'd say my conversion experience, I would say that there was an immediate transformation. There was an immediate, which you can call deliverance from mental illness and addictions that were in my life. So there was definitely that piece to it, but I still had to learn what it meant to be a person of faith, because I didn't know that. I had grown up in a pretty fundamentalist church, so I had one perspective, and that's all I had. So when I became a Christian, I also thought that meant that I'm Republican now. Like I thought this is a package deal. When you convert, you're now conservative, and you now have all of this worldview. Like that was it, because that was kind of what I had experienced, and so I was in a place where I was like, I really need community because I'm a person of faith. And so I went kind of from church to church. I'd just go visit churches each Sunday. I'd go to a different church and go, okay, that was cool. I don't know what the heck they were doing over there. Like, to try and find one that fit with who I was personality wise. So I had no real theology. I knew brokenness and grace, but I didn't have any kind of a theology. But I kind of dove all in for the first 6 months, year. I was like, okay, well, this is it. Like I said, I'm registered Republican now because I'm a Christian, and so
Yep.
I went to summer camp. So I became a Christian in January of 2003. I went to summer camp that following summer, mostly to stay out of trouble, because I was like, idle hands and all that. And so I went to summer camp, but I was the only person that was not recruited from a Bible school, because it was a Christian summer camp, and so everybody else was recruited from a Bible school or a Christian liberal arts school. So I was very different than a lot of the others, because these were folks who were studying to be pastors and studying to go into missions and things like that. And so I was different. I didn't know that you couldn't curse around children and those sorts of things. It was just one of those. I had to learn the Christianese. It was a completely foreign language to me to understand what it was. And so I was continuing in my regular, at the time I declared my major as social work. And so I continued in social work. But I didn't have a place to take my newfound faith and apply it to my work. So in social work, it's a biopsychosocial spiritual assessment that you do. And that spiritual almost becomes parenthetical for a lot of folks. They really don't know what to do with it. In the behavioral sciences, a lot of times it's kind of this, and you have to deal with people's crazy beliefs too. And that wasn't good enough for me, because I was as a person who had just found faith, all of everything was now going through that lens. And as it does for everyone. whether they're a person that would identify with a specific organized faith group or not, how we see the world gets interpreted through a spiritual lens. Even folks who would self-identify as atheistic, they have a spiritual lens.
Yes.
Even if there's not a deity to worship, there's still a spirituality. And so I thought, man, we're missing a big chunk of people. If you're talking to a devout Jew and you're not going to talk about his Jewishness and how that impacts his relationship with his family, or how he conducts himself in business or work, or you're talking to somebody who's say somebody's like a real conservative, like Assemblies of God, and they're struggling with anxiety, depression, and you're not going to address how their faith impacts their anxiety and depression. I just thought it was strange. The psych world, it was
At the sensors?
I think it was. Yeah.
There we go. Hey.
And in the psych world, there's kind of this distrust. I don't even know if it's distrust. It's kind of this annoyance with the religious world, and vice versa. I mean, that's mutual. The religious world's like, I don't know about that whole science psychology stuff.
For sure.
And so, like, if you talk to a Christian counselor, a lot of times they're terribly informed. They're not using best practice, and what they're doing sometimes is not even ethical, because they refuse to use the social sciences and the evidence that's out there. And vice versa, the social sciences sometimes have this animosity to say, that religious thing, they want to compartmentalize it and set it aside. And so I think
because, like you said, like once you acknowledged, or once you accepted the fact that you were Christian, you're like, well, I also have to have these beliefs.
Sure.
So people are shoring up their own defenses because they just have an idea of what that person is.
Yeah, it was my own biases. I was going to fit a stereotype that was in my head. I so desperately wanted faith that I was willing to sacrifice huge parts of who I was and part of my identity because I needed community desperately.
Yeah.
And so I was willing to sacrifice certain other beliefs because I thought it was a package deal. And so, So I started in the world of social work, and I knew that I wanted to continue with mental health. But I wanted to be able to incorporate faith, and I wanted to learn about my own faith. I wanted to learn how to articulate how I saw the world as well. And so I went to seminary, and in seminary, I had an opportunity to go do a chaplaincy internship. And when I got there, I was like, this is it. This is a beautiful combination of the social sciences and faith and spirituality. And I had no idea what chaplaincy was. Like I said, if you would have asked me anything about who I would be in the future 20 years ago, I would have.
You got it totally wrong, man.
I would have laughed at virtually any of it. Yeah.
Yeah. Any of it, because it was just headed down such a negative path in your life. Is, I would imagine there's many positives that you wouldn't account for back then. Sure.
Yeah. There are. I have wonderful friends that I'm still friends with back in my hometown. I still visit, and they're wonderful people. And I don't know that I've ever tried to proselytize or convert or anything like that.
Well, that's one thing that I mentioned, because my wife is also atheist, and I was like, well, I'm going to interview my buddy Tom, and he he's a chaplain. Well, she's like, what, like in the hospital? I'm like, yeah. He's like, oh, so he's like churchy. And I'm like, well, he knows your stuff, as you're elaborating here now on the angle that you came from. Like, that's beautiful. But I was like, one thing because I told her about the F3 workout group where I met you from, where I meet up with you guys every Saturday morning at 6 a.m. And I tell her, I'm like, part of the F's, F3, fitness, fellowship, and faith is the last one. And you're always like, when there's new guys coming through, because everybody's a little weary to that faith part, because you can't say you're spiritual without people thinking that you're religious. Like, I agree with you when you say spiritual, while there might not be a deity in particular. And I know you're quick to just be like, well, listen, if the faith part is just believing in something bigger than yourself. So I'm like, you don't... I have yet to have that pushed on me in a group where at the end we always finish in a prayer. And, certain guys, will actually use Jesus, as who they're finishing, saying the prayer to or whatnot. And I noticed that you're very conscious about saying Lord or God.
Yeah.
Like you're not specifically saying Jesus, just in case we do get somebody in, of a different faith or spirituality.
Right. Yeah. I don't believe that I have to sacrifice who I am, my identity, in order to meet somebody else where they're at. And so I know who I'm praying to, but to declare that alienates people, and so I don't need to sacrifice my own view to be able to meet them and to be able to join them. And so I am very intentional. If I know somebody, if I'm in a group, like if I'm at the hospital and somebody asks me to pray and I know that they're a person of the Christian tradition, I'll pray in Jesus' name, because we've talked about their faith, and I'll usually ask them what their tradition is and that sort of thing if it's appropriate in the conversation. Yeah. And so, I'm very used to a general prayer because of
the work that you do.
Yeah.
You don't know who's going to request your services at the hospital.
Right.
You don't know.
Yeah. And I think that defeats the purpose of the prayer itself, and why we're doing that. I mean, it's acknowledgement, like I said, an acknowledgement of something outside of ourselves, expressing gratitude, whether you believe in a specific deity or not. Expressing gratitude for health is not a bad thing for a person who's not of a religious persuasion. So
when I read, I didn't read. I listened to the God Delusion by Dawkins. Yeah. And I mean, one of the studies that he cited where it was like people that were in the hospital sick, if they knew that somebody was praying about them to get better, they got better.
Right.
That is statistically sound in the experiment that happened. And, of course, he's going to dress it up or just say, well, this is why this could have happened and whatnot. Right. But the fact of the matter is that it helped. And mainly the idea could be just that there's that sense of community that you were looking for, and people had that in the back of their mind that they were rooting for them, that they were hoping that they were going to get better. And again, praying to, a power or something greater than yourself. Right. And those people got better statistically faster.
Right. And that's the point, right? I mean, whether we can explain it in a language, whether we can use theology to explain it or we can use science to explain it, to me, that's a completely moot point. I really don't care, because people's pain's reduced. They're feeling better. And I really don't care how or why, honestly.
Why should we?
Right.
Why should we?
Right.
Okay. I want to know the truth, the complete truth, and why this happened. Okay, cool. But at the end of the day, it worked.
And I'll tell you, I read a lot. I mean, I have 4 years of seminary, and so the more I study those things, the less answers I have about how it is, those absolutes that were really important at the beginning of my faith
can I just
journey.
comment that you've given me chills like 12 different times already? Like, I just, I feel you.
So when I first became a believer, I had to have this really clear definition.
You have to defend yourself.
Right. I had to have a God that was consistent. I had to have a religion that was consistent and very black and white. It was very necessary early on in the first part of my faith journey. The further out that I get from that moment, it's not that I lose my faith. It's actually a broader, more open faith. But things like literal interpretations of scriptures, early in my journey, that was really important.
Yeah.
Not so much. Early in my journey, it was really important that the earth was 10,000 years old because I had to have something solid to be able to stand on. And later, I'm able to walk in a more open conversation. But I wouldn't say that like I'm less faithful because of some of those changing and adapting and evolving views of what my spirituality and how I interpret scriptures and how I understand God and those things. And so, early on, I would have been a terrible chaplain. If I wouldn't have been an appropriate person to be in that position.
I think that's why you have to go through the internship or mentorship,
Right.
to work out your rough edges.
Yeah. And the process to become a chaplain is actually pretty rigorous. To get a board certification in chaplaincy actually takes longer. It has more steps and it takes longer than a professional counseling license. So if I wanted licensure in Arizona to do private practice therapy, that would be a shorter road than my chaplain road was.
Oh shit.
Yeah, it's a lot of people don't know that. They assume, well, it's just some pastor.
You get some certificate. It's almost like because you can get ordained to.
Right.
Come on now. You can get ordained to do marriages, right? Come on, Tom, give me a prayer.
Let there be light.
I think the light's okay.
It's over behind the bush.
What is it? Oh, that sensor? Let me hit it real quick. Sorry, folks. Keep talking, though. I can hear you.
We talk about... Where were we?
Is it? They hit it?
Yeah, I went.
Okay. Why would they put that behind the tree? I need to talk to management.
Right?
All right. Where did we leave off?
I was trying to think.
Internship, ordained is you can just go online and get a certificate to get ordained. So I guess people would kind of like maybe lump it in that, not knowing any better.
Sure. And so in chaplaincy, there's kind of a standardizing. The Association of Professional Chaplains is a multi-faith interdenominational group. That's kind of the gold standard for board certification. And that's an international organization that kind of sets where our bar is and what our standards are. Mm-hmm. And there are those, we don't have title protection the way social workers or counselors or psychologists
What's that mean?
So early on, psychologists, in order to call yourself a psychologist, you have to have a certain degree and certain qualifications, and it has to be accredited by the APA and all of those sorts of things. And so counseling followed, social work came next after psychology, and then counseling's on the tail end of that. Chaplaincy is probably 10 years behind the rest of those as far as what title protection. That basically, in order to call yourself a social worker, you have to have licensure you have to have a master's in social work degree, and then you have to have the licensure. There's lots of people who call themselves social workers who don't have that, but it makes it harder to... Standardization is important because it makes sure that there's some consistency there, and it also offers accountability and the ethics of it. Mm-hmm. So there are those who call themselves chaplains who may or may not have any education, may or may not have any training, may or may not have any accountability to a faith community. They could just walk in off the street and say a chaplain. In a hospital setting or in a military setting, you have to have the standards of it for ethical reasons. And so chaplains years ago started kind of that process of saying, here's our standards, and then really advocating for themselves, much like social workers or counselors or others in the human service field. Be able to say, if you don't meet these minimum qualifications, don't hire these folks, because you're getting something different. That doesn't mean that people who are not educated or trained in the same path that I've chosen, that they are not capable or that they wouldn't necessarily be good, but it offers a pretty vast filter.
Yeah, for sure.
To be able to prevent folks who are ill-equipped being in front of patients. And that's to protect the chaplain or the person and the patient and their families as well. If you expose somebody to the traumas and the things that chaplains are involved with, and they don't have their own training for processing, it could really damage them.
True.
And it could be really bad for the family as well.
Yeah, it's high risk situation event, not high risk, but it's just you're there at a traumatizing time at most of the time, I mean, the patient themselves, but like the most important time of their life, most likely. And you can't fumble that.
Right. Yeah. You're showing up on the worst day of another person's life. And, some ministers, even with good intention, they have very few tools in their tool belt. And so proselytizing, evangelism might be the only tool in their tool belt. And in their mind, that's what the person needs is evangelism in that moment. And there's huge ethical problems with that. It's spiritual abuse to take somebody who's vulnerable and is not a willing participant in this proselytizing. And so that's one of those things that just prevents that from happening. It also, there's more to being a chaplain than being like the official prayer of the hospital, right? If that's the only tool in your tool belt is you just go and you pray, that there's so many other things that are important, that are tools.
Yeah, I completely agree.
To utilize, yeah.
Yeah, you're drawing or you're walking a fine line in that scenario, because it is spiritual, but you have to be ethical because of, I don't want to say your clients, but like the people that you are tending to. Like you have to, have all those tools in your tool belt, like you're saying, to properly give them the support that they need. Instead of just like, well, here's my answer in this. Which is why I want to get to that post that you shared. If you can elaborate that again about some soon-to-be parents that went through a rough, not a rough patch. Geez, that's underselling it. But yeah, can you speak on that? Like, how long were you in? I think it was pretty recent from when you had just started, right?
It was when I first started in my residency. So it was the first. I did an internship for 2 semesters while I was in, and then after I graduated from seminary, I went and did a year-long residency. And it was in the first couple of weeks of the residency. And basically what had happened was...
A couple of weeks, wow.
Yeah, I was still being oriented in the hospital. We had a children's hospital, and we had a trauma center. That was a standard like 500-bed hospital. And then we are attached to a big children's hospital as well. And so there are some people who were really weary and not wanting to go into the children's hospital. But as a parent, I felt like that was something that would be important for my training. And so I took a unit or two in the children's hospital as well, in the NICU and the ICU over there. But so when you're in school, or when one is in school, they have the luxury of being able to write out their theology. You don't have to, it doesn't have to be applied to anything. It just has to make sense. And so the point I was making in that post is that until you're there, it's kind of like everybody has a plan until you get punched in the face.
Yeah, for sure.
Until you're there. So I had
that's more than a punch in the face. Jeez, that's like a kick in the nuts, dude.
So I had, and that was it, is that I had all, I had this theology that I had been developing in my mind, and kind of knew who I was, which was good. But still didn't know what it would be like to get a call to go down to the children's hospital. And so I did. I had a call for a family who unexpectedly, actually, when she came in, they had no idea that the baby had deceased, but she was full term, and she delivered still. And so I got this call from the nurse that said, "Hey, come down here," and I could tell from the nurse's voice that there was just something different. It was. I think part of it is that a lot of sick people in the hospital. A lot of times when things go wrong, it's because a really bad choice was made, or a series of bad choices were made. Right. So when tragedy strikes unexpectedly, when trauma strikes unexpectedly to average everyday Joes, not people who are making really bad choices, it feels different in a hospital setting. I think part of it is that it's one of those things where it's like, oh, that can happen to me. Like that can happen to our neighbors. That's something that happens to people that we know, people we would hang out with. And so anyway, I was going down there, and I just kind of had that heaviness of the call. And so I'm kind of just running through it in my head, like, what am I going to say to this family? What are they going to ask for? And went into the room, and they were probably early 20s. They had just been married. This was their first kid.
So it wasn't like the umbilical cord was around the neck?
No.
You don't happen to know?
They had no idea what had caused it, and they may have done an autopsy. I'm not sure. Okay. But there was no indication, and so the nurses were shook up. The family obviously is devastated, and so they were people of faith. They had a large faith community support and large family support. But I went in, and the young man was sitting there, and again, this could have been, me. This could have been one of my neighbors. This could have been people I know, people I'd hang out with. Yeah. And he just looks up. I mean, I could tell he'd been crying for a little while, and he looked up. I introduced myself, said, "Hey, I'm one of the chaplains," and he just, deadlock square in the eye, and just goes, "Why?" That's it. I mean, he doesn't elaborate. He doesn't explain. He just says, "Why?" And it chilled my spine, because I was like, it was one of those moments. I'm like, I have all of these ideas of why, right? I had studied. Yeah. This is that moment. I could have kicked into
coming into like, okay, right. Here we go.
Right. I could have grabbed the Bible and given him scriptures. I could have said all kinds of things. But I realized there's absolutely nothing that would suffice. There's no answer. Even if it was an accurate answer, it would have not been an answer. It would have not filled it. And so my response literally was, I don't know. I have no idea. And the next thing I could think of was, but I see it hurts. And so I grabbed the guy, and I put him in a big old hug, and we just sat there crying for quite a while. And then when he finally stopped, but I don't even know that we said anything. I didn't have anything to say. In chaplaincy, we talk about a ministry of presence and utilizing the silence and all of these things. And so, I knew these things, and I at that time I had been a chaplain for a while. I'd worked at the VA hospital. I'd been around death a lot. I'd been around, all kinds of tough stuff. But that was just one that stuck out to me, pretty distinct, and it definitely changed and informed my care. Till now, there are several cases like that I can think of that they really solidified the calling to that type of space. I tell folks all the time, the very worst and the very best parts of my job are one and the same, which is really hard to describe, because I'm around tragedy. These are babies dying. These are loved ones. These are people's moms and dads. But it's sacred, holy space to walk in. Not every pastor would have that, on Sunday morning necessarily. But I know when I go to work that I'm going to be invited into somebody's family and walk with them. In the real rawness of life.
And you wear some of that. You absorb you know, a lot of that.
Sure.
You know, so it's you literally are walking with them. It's like you might not know them before you walk into that room, but once you're in that room and you're, you know, feeding off of their energy and, you know, what is presented in front of you, like it's gonna take its toll on you as well, but it becomes part of you.
It does. It definitely changes. Not only does it inform my practice in the hospital setting, but it changes how I see the world. It changes
Your
how I interact
appreciation.
with my family. It changes.
Yeah.
And there are times that I can't go home right away because of that. I mean, there are times that I'm like, I'll call my wife and just say, I'm going to go for a run. And when it stops hurting, I'll come home.
Oh my God, dude. That's deep. Yeah. I knew you were going to make me cry today. That's huge, man. Cause yeah, it's like, you know, I was showing her, my wife, again, your work, and she's like, I could never do it, you know? Like, one thing that she wants to become is a CASA, you know, a child, court-appointed
Special advocate
for children. Like, she wants to fight for kids. Like,
Right.
she wants to, you know, do that. So, you know, and even then she's like, I don't know if I could because I'll you know, there's no way she can't come home with that, you know? And it's like,
Right.
yeah, you have to be right in your own mind, right? Which is, you know, a testament to what you went through to get to that point. Where, of course, it's not going to be easy, but you're mitigating a lot of the challenges and the pain that you're gonna go through.
Right.
And it's awesome to hear that your wife's pretty understanding, man.
Yeah. She is, and my children are as well. They know if I've had a bad day. I mean, I have my own rituals and routines and my own care. I have pastors and other support persons that I reach out to, and you know, sometimes if it's needed, I'll see my own therapist and do my own work as well. Because you're right. I mean, you could carry all that, or I could carry all that home.
Yeah.
And there are times. I mean, there have been times where, like I said, I can't go home just yet.
Yeah.
And then there are times that I go home and I climb into my kid's bed and I sleep with them.
Yeah. You would imagine as such. I remember last year I got a call that our coworker died unexpectedly, and I was out playing ultimate frisbee, and I called. I had a missed call from a coworker, so I called him, and he's like, "Hey, did you hear?" I'm like, "No." I'm like, "What?" So called one of my other coworkers and talked to him the whole way home, and then my wife called, and she's like, "Hey, are you here? Are you outside? Like, I think your truck's out there." And I was like, "Yeah, I'm just." You know, like, and I just couldn't spit it out. Like, I was just crying like heavily, and she like was like, "What's wrong? What's going on?" I was like, "No, you know, I couldn't even spit the words out, and all I wanted to do was just go home and, you know, hug my kids and just, you know, because you never know, you know, you never know. So I can definitely sympathize with that. Again, you see it on the daily, I would say, but
yeah, I mean, of course there are those cases that just, you know, hook in and won't let go. On the regular rhythms of it, you know, it's not, they don't always impact in that same way.
For sure.
I don't know that I'd be able to cope with it if it did. I had a case with, there was a 7-year-old girl who had an aneurysm out of the blue. So they're at a barbecue, they're all swimming and just boom. And at the time, my daughter was 7 also.
oh jeez.
And so I remember sitting in that room and like you talk about just hooking with me, because it's like, it's summertime. I'm going to a barbecue. Again, it's that the realization is like, holy cow, like you're wrestling with your own mortality and your own children's mortality, going, that could have been me, right? It's not like when somebody comes in after, you know, going 200 miles an hour down the highway, and you go, well, yeah, that happens. Tough luck. But it, you know, out of the blue type of stuff are the ones that usually will
The ones that you can explain, because again, you can explain that one, like you said, you're going 200 miles an hour, like your odds.
Yeah, if you are drinking, you know, a liter of liquor every single day, I can tell you the outcome. It eventually ends in a very specific way.
So you're saying I should cut back? Is this an intervention? Who's coming through that door?
Well, I mean, I say that I see motorcycle accidents and I ride a motorcycle. I go out and hang out and have a drink with friends.
I was thinking
so.
about that the other day. I'm like, how stupid are you to not wear a helmet? But then I'm like, wait, I said, if you don't wear a helmet and you get into a serious accident, then it's almost like an easy, quick death. Whereas if you're wearing the helmet, you kind of prolong it.
I've heard that. I've heard that from more than one person. It's like, hey man, I wouldn't want to live through this anyway.
Yeah.
And I will say there is a distinct difference in an emergency department between those who are wearing a helmet and those who are not.
See, you would have the experience to actually, make a solid choice on that.
Yeah.
Have you, and I know you have, you've had to, but can you tell me a time where somebody got really aggressive with you?
I have had only one or two circumstances where people were real aggressive.
Like angry, like,
yeah.
I mean, there's anger in death. I mean, it's there, but
right. I try and be like my father. I try and be as patient as possible. And so when people are aggressive toward me, I know that that's not about me, right?
No.
If somebody's having a really hard time and they are getting worked up,
I can even say because like angry at God because of this habit of time. So it's like they're projecting it to you because you're a man of God.
Yeah, there are definitely people. I have colleagues who have been hit and that sort of thing. I've never had that. I think I had one when I was at the VA. I walked in and I said, "Hey, I'm Thomas, one of the chaplains," and he rolled over and goes, "Get the fuck out." And so I walked over and I sat down right next to him and said, "Tell me more about that." And he was blown away that I had the audacity to actually sit down. I'm like, but seriously, like,
yeah,
tell me more about that. And he opened up. I mean, he was pissed off at God. He was pissed off at the church. He had spiritual injury. He had all kinds of stuff. But I was playful when I did it, so he knew that I wasn't threatening. I didn't, use my body to posture. I went and sat in a vulnerable place behind him, and he could hear in my tone that I was being playful. And it, he had his back to me for quite a while, but he eventually rolled over and just started.
He's like, "Who's this crazy dude?"
So I'm one of those. I've said before, if somebody is yelling and screaming, chances are they want to be heard, right? That's why they're raising their voice.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so if you listen to somebody who's yelling and screaming, they start to quiet down. And so I'll usually go, and if somebody's irate, if I go in and take a posture of openness and submissiveness, I hold the space that I'm in, but I get lower than them, and I give them room to be able to yell and scream and rant and rave. They eventually stop because nobody wants to rant and rave. They want to be heard.
Yeah.
So it's just a very different posture. If we go back to law enforcement, same thing. You could de-escalate it or you can escalate it. If you have the authority and you want to use the authority to try and de-escalate, chances are the person's going to kind of push back, right?
Yeah, for sure.
If you get in my face, if somebody came and got in my face and said, "You need to be quiet right now," I probably would get louder and I'd probably posture and, we'd probably roll within a couple of minutes because I wouldn't want the person, in my face like that.
Yeah.
But if you come in and say, "Man, it looks like you're really hurting. It looks like you're really frustrated." It's pretty hard to keep screaming at that. Even somebody who's intoxicated and somebody who's, really worked up.
Yeah. They're looking for that affirmation.
They usually will calm down. I'll sit down. So I've had very few that will like straight up throw me out, and I'll respect somebody's space. But most of the time, if I enter into that and I talk to them civilly, they start to talk to me civilly. If I show them respect, they start to show me respect. And you go to any prison guard in the world, and they'll tell you that same thing, right? If you go in there and you're gonna threaten to put your knee in the chest of the guy, he's gonna buck on you.
Yeah, oh for sure.
So I treat it that same way. Sometimes if somebody's worked up, I'll try and beat the security guards there to see if I can calm them down before security's there, just as a game.
Yeah, you hold your own.
Yeah, and I mean sometimes that that's not gonna. It doesn't always happen magically, but people who are angry at God or angry at the church, that's not about me.
Yeah.
I don't take personal offense to that. So if somebody comes in, they oftentimes, quite honestly, they have a right. And if my 7-year-old daughter had a brain aneurysm, I'd be angry at God, and I'd have the right to be angry at God. If I had spiritual injury from the church, I have the right to be angry at them. An injustice was done, and anger is a good response to injustice. So if somebody's mad at me because I represent the cloth, right? Because I'm the pastor, I'm okay with that. And sometimes I use my pastoral authority to try and make amends to a injury that was done by the church, because I'm in the position, I am ordained, and so I can stand on behalf of the church and say, yeah, the church hurt you, and it's not fair, and it is unjust.
And I would feel the same way, like that. You're affirming that what they are feeling is natural, and they're justified in those feelings. Right. And then let's work through it.
Yeah.
Dude, that's so dope, man. Yeah, you're doing great work. If somebody's interested, to get involved, like in a chaplaincy, how does one go about that?
So that's the double-edged sword of standardizing things. When you standardize things, then sometimes it starts to exclude folks who are super capable and who would be excellent at it. So I had a colleague she had a master's degree in storytelling. Wonderful chaplain, one of the best chaplains that I've worked with. A wonderful understanding of the work that we do. But in order to be a chaplain, you have to have a master's of divinity or equivalent is the first step. And so she would have had to gone back to grad school a second time for 4 more years. I mean, that's no joke. I mean, 90 credit hours to start over. So if you have somebody who's mid-career, who might have all of the talent and all of the skill and all of the understanding, there's no way to really be grandfathered in. So to be board certified, it's a master's of divinity or equivalent based on the faith tradition. So if somebody's Buddhist or Jewish or something that's not within the Christian tradition, they have their own schools of theology, their own schools of religious teaching. And even actually I've met atheistic chaplains as well. So some roads to chaplaincy, if somebody's Wiccan, there's not a Wiccan seminary. So they have to have something that's equivalent within their faith tradition. Then it's additional training that's called CPE. And CPE is clinical pastoral education. And board certification requires 4 units of that. A unit is 400 hours. So it's 100 classroom hours and 300 practicing hours. So what that works out to is 3 months per unit. And so you enter a residency, or one enters a residency post divinity degree. Then they have to be endorsed by their faith community. Okay. So for me, I'm ordained with the Independent Christian Church, and then we have an endorsing commission that does all of the Christian churches of Christ. If somebody's Southern Baptist, it'd be the same thing, and other traditions, they have some sort of an endorsing commission that will do that endorsement.
Are there any Westboro Baptist chaplains?
Absolutely not. I guarantee that there's not.
You can guarantee that?
I can guarantee that. There might be people at Westboro that would call themselves chaplain, but I guarantee that they would never, ever.
I think that's a podcast for a different day, man.
I think, that would be tough. Honestly, there are some within the Christian tradition that have a really tough time doing the process. For one, it's interfaith, and so working along colleagues, there are Christians who can't even work with Catholics who are also Christian, but because they're not like this specific strain, they can't work together for whatever reason. And so if you can't work with people different than yourself, you can't be a chaplain, basically. You have to be able to minister to other people. I don't have to dissolve in the room. I'm still a Christian minister when I go into a room. If I go into a room with a Roman Catholic, I'll meet them where they are, but I don't dissolve my identity. I'm very much present as a Protestant minister, and I'll pray with a Catholic if a Catholic wants to pray. I'll pray with somebody who's in the LDS church if they want to pray. Like most other traditions are okay with praying, but there are sacraments I can't offer.
So you never like whip out a rosary?
Right. Well, I can offer a rosary that's been blessed by our priest, but I can't bring them their sacrament because I'm not a Eucharistic minister. I'm not Catholic.
No, yeah.
So my job at that point becomes being an advocate for them and calling leaders within their faith community.
Gotcha.
But most traditions, I could provide quite a bit of care to folks outside of my own worldview before I would need to call. I've worked with Muslim folks who will take my Christian prayer.
Oh, nice.
And they will allow me to offer them support. But when it comes to rituals, then I would advocate for them, and I'd call their faith community and have their faith community come in, and sometimes I'll ask if I can stay. I've stayed in other rooms to watch.
Because technically, you're also not allowed to touch their sacred scriptures, right?
Yeah. So there's different traditions with different sects of others, and that's the thing, is that the best that I can do is ask them. It's like anything else, right? Any other diversity thing. It's not a matter of like what I think it should be. It's a matter of asking them what's important to them, what their identity is, and helping to meet those. If it's outside, like if
you don't light up with the Rastafarian.
No.
You know,
I have gone in with a shaman before from the reservation.
Yeah.
And they'll do sage and sometimes they'll do crystal healing, things like that. And I've asked if I could stay, if that was appropriate. And they've invited me into that space before. So
that's too cool.
Yeah, I've been able to see some different traditions and different rituals for different things. I was going to say something. I can't remember what it was now.
Damn it. I knew I shouldn't have thrown that joke out there.
It's all right. Oh, man.
Sorry, man.
I can't remember what it was.
Come on, give me something. Is it behind the tree again?
I think it is.
How are we doing on time? It's 4 o'clock.
It's 3:55. Oh, I remember what I was going to say. If somebody asks for something that's outside of my tradition, right? If somebody asks for me to go get them some sage or some crystals, I could go collect those elements for them.
Gotcha. Okay.
That's not going to break the sacredness. I'll bring water from the river Ganges for the Hindu patient if they ask for those things. So some of those resources I can collect for them without interrupting the sacredness of their tradition.
Yeah.
But there are, like I said, I can't bring communion. I've had folks when their baby is born ask if I can baptize. In my tradition, we don't baptize infants, and so if there's not somebody that's available, I'll say I can come down and I have oil and I can place oil on the baby's head and I can say a prayer.
Yeah.
Because it just depends on what the person is wanting. If they want a baptism, it's not fair for me to step in front of their faith tradition and their own teachings. I'm not going to try and convince them, well, you don't need that. I'll do my best to advocate for them and get somebody else that's in. Mm-hmm. If I have a patient who's LDS and they're asking for a blessing, I'm not a priest within that tradition. I'm not somebody who can offer, or an elder within that tradition, so I can't offer the blessing. I can pray with them, and I'll tell them. I'll say, this is who I am. This is what I have to offer. If that's what you want, then great. If you need something else, I'm going to do my best to try and fit your needs. Most people, they just want compassion and somebody to meet them where they're at. And so I've had folks who couldn't wait any longer for the priest to arrive to give them anointing of the sick or last rites.
Yeah.
And so they'll say, can you bless us? And, that might offend folks within that tradition. but to me, it's meeting somebody in that emergency and meeting
Exactly.
them. The reality of the world, right? My tradition teaches water immersion baptism. If you don't have water to immerse the person, and you don't think that God has the ability
Yeah.
to meet you in that space, right?
Yeah.
So I do my best to honor whatever their tradition is, but if I can offer them something from where I am. I had a supervisor once say it really well. He said, there was a student that was kind of talking about, like, you want us to be everyone, you want us to be everything to everyone, and so we're just kind of this big melting pot, and the supervisor basically said, no, quite the opposite. I want you to be the very best Baptist that you can be. I want you to know what it means to be Baptist and be a Baptist. And I want her to be a Seventh-day Adventist. And I want her to be the very best Seventh-day Adventist. And I want her to be a Buddhist. I want her to be the very best Buddhist who can offer care. And in that moment, it clicked for me, because a lot of folks think, like, if it's progressive or that too liberal, you're going to give up your identity of your being a Baptist. It's like, no, you, by all means, be a Baptist, be a good Baptist.
Yeah.
Understand yourself and where you're coming from, and do that. So I thought that was really eye-opening for me, because I get to return that same lesson to patients. If I go in and somebody says, "Oh, I'm Catholic," I'll say, "Okay, how can I best support you as a Protestant minister?" And that gives them that same gift. I'm not asking you to not be Catholic.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to stop being, I'm not going to stop being a Protestant minister in that space. I think that's a beautiful picture of diversity, right? Diversity is about owning your identity and who you are, not just dissolving your identity in that space.
To fit, it's that assimilation in a sense,
right? Right.
You need to do some things, to kind of work it, but you can't lose yourself, your culture, your identity.
Right. And that's a, not to get way off topic, but that's a really, especially for those of us who have predominant spiritual beliefs or dominant spiritual beliefs, similar to my whiteness or my maleness. My Christianness is not the standard by which all things are measured. And that's one of those things about privilege, right? When people say, why don't we all be the same? I'm colorblind. That type of an idea, what you're asking them to do is to become white or to become male. And so if I said the same thing, if I'm not comfortable with your Muslimness, and so I need you to behave more Christian-like. And so I think that's a really important lesson in how diversity works and how religious diversity works. I have dear friends who are devout in other faith traditions, and we get along great. And we would never. It's a very foreign concept to us to think of you'd have to become like me for us to be friends. You'd have to no longer exist as you are in order for us to get along. It's a crazy idea. I mean,
You just have to try and understand. Not why. Right. Why is a loaded question, right? Why? It's like how. How are you who you are? Not why. Because now you're throwing like intent behind who I am. Well, I'm this way because I want to project this. It's like, this is just who I am, and I happen to project this. Right? That's, I guess, how I could try and word it the best I can. Which is the whole point behind what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to interview interesting, people, different backgrounds, and it's only going to help me to improve. Taking in more information and more outlooks is only going to help me out. Right.
Yeah. Until we sit down and do this, and this is the way that we communicate. Until we sit down and say, "Hey, I want to know more about you," just for the sake of knowing more about you, not to try and change who you are or what you believe or what you think, and not to convince you of anything, but just truly to understand you. I think we'll be in a much better place if we're there until we learn to communicate in that way and say, I'm okay, you're okay, we're okay.
Yeah.
It'll just be broken. It'll just be that, like I said, people yelling want to be heard, and so we got a whole lot of yelling.
Yeah.
To me, it says we got a whole bunch of people who feel unheard and marginalized, and like their voices aren't there.
Well, what's that? Rage Against the Machine has that song where the riot is the rhyme of the unheard.
Right.
You know, it's
good.
like, you're okay. If you can't hear us, if you're choosing to shut us out, like, we will escalate it to a point where you can't ignore us anymore.
Right.
So if you try to understand, where people are coming from, then while you still might not agree with, the outcomes or the process, but you can still appreciate, just trying to understand them. That's it.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. I mean, what happens in the hospital room is a microcosm of what happens out there. I mean, that space is the same thing. It's still about power. I have power in that room. Mm-hmm. I go in with knowledge and authority. I go in as I go back and forth. Am I inviting them to the hospital and practicing hospitality? Or are they inviting me into their room and practicing hospitality? Or is it a little bit of both, right? I'm there to make sure that they're welcomed, because that's what's happening in a hospital. We're welcoming you in and making sure that you feel safe and all those things. Mm-hmm. But we're both inviting one another in that space. But I have a duty to recognize my power in that space. I have a duty to recognize my privilege in that space. When I go in, they're sick, they're vulnerable, they are stuck in a bed. I'm not. I have to recognize where I put my body, how I use that space, until I'm invited into it, really. And so there's a little bit of a dance until then. I think outside of the hospital room, it's the very, very same thing, right? Recognize the privileges that you have, the innate privileges and the power dynamics that are there, and then enter into those conversations, and then allow that space where both can be heard. Because it's not equal. I mean, it's always about power, whether it's social or in the hospital, anywhere. I mean, everything's about the disbursement of power and control of the situation, and inviting others into it.
Yeah, making them feel like, that you can level with them. Like, you're coming in with a title, or you're coming in with God at your back. He's got your back, right?
Right.
But allowing them to know that you're coming in a submissive form, in a sense, to try and make them comfortable.
Yeah, both and, right? I mean, so we have a long history in our country of Western medicine and healthcare being, here are the experts. They know more about you than you know about you, and that's how it's framed, right? Yeah. They go in and I know better, and I'm going to tell you what to do next.
Yeah.
We've changed. We've become much more patient-centered. Within the last couple of decades, really in the last decade, we've become much more patient-centered, that says, hey, we're going to be a team with the patient. Chaplaincy is the same thing, right? If I go in and I throw around knowledge, because that's something that I have, right? I go in and I have the education and the experience that I have. If I go in and I abuse that power, that knowledge is power, right? So if I go in and I know better than them in their spirituality, I'm going to teach them about their spirituality. That's abusive.
Yeah. And they're not going to listen.
Right.
You're going to shut them down.
Right. And at the same time, understanding that there is a dynamic that's there, that there is an authority that's there, that there is an education that's there. And so just a recognition of it, as opposed to saying everybody's all equal. Well, I tell you what, I don't want to be an equal voting voice with my physician on a healthcare issue. As far as like the treatment, yes, I want 100% of the voice. But the doctor does know better. a lot of the time,
Yeah.
right? They have access. He or she has access to more information than I do because I'm not educated.
More
in that.
information, more scenarios, more often, more events. Like,
Right.
Yeah.
So it would be crazy to go in and be like, think that we're equal in that relationship, right? That my knowledge, I have knowledge of me and my symptoms and you know what my experience is. The doctor has a lot of knowledge in the disease process and the evidence-based care that goes into addressing those diseases and those ailments. Like,
Is this a roundabout way for you to take a stab at anti-vaxxers?
we could do that if you want.
No, that's another topic. That's funny.
I have dear friends who are anti-vaxxers.
Same. They're there, and I love them, and I love them.
I hold pretty tightly to some libertarian viewpoints, and so I'm very sympathetic.
Of course.
They might be wrong on the science, but I'm very sympathetic.
Again, you're trying to understand them.
Right.
And at that point, you can, you might not agree with a person's outlook, but you can understand with their reasoning, whether,
Absolutely.
again, you might not agree with their reasoning. But
Right. And I can empathize with it. If you truly believe that something's going to harm your children, like I can empathize with being angry and wanting to fight that I get that. I'm not one to do name calling and shame people. I can only go based on numbers on stuff like that.
Yeah, that's the big thing. It's like, it's easy. It's like that straw man argument. It's like all those argument points where it's like you just kind of like take this one point and then just exponentially just attack that one point. It's like you're avoiding 90% of their argument or their beliefs just so you can be right. And I've never liked that. As much as I feel like I may be right in a lot of my reasoning, I don't like to walk away from something and be like, yeah, I was right and I got them. Like,
Yep.
unless they're genuinely, trying to attack, do that to me,
Right.
I try not to.
And I will say this, you can be 100% factually right and be wrong at the same time, right?
Yeah.
If you're
I'm just quoting statistics, bro. I'm just quoting statistics.
If you're even if you're right, even if you have the facts, if you're using it to bully somebody, if you're using it to bring harm to somebody, it's wrong, right?
Mm-hmm.
The information's not wrong, but your way of approaching relationship is wrong. And so I see that. There's tension there, though. In the hospital, I'll have people that will debate with doctors about things, right? A doctor can come in. I actually just had a scenario like this. A physician, multiple physicians, all shared the exact same opinion based on statistics and numbers, and they came in and they said, we can't ethically continue to offer certain interventions for your loved one in the ICU. They were basically saying, we can keep her intubated, but we're not going to do CPR any longer if her heart stops, and it will.
Oh, okay.
Right. So they were saying her heart is going to stop, and we cannot ethically do any more chest compressions because of futility of care. There's nothing more we can do. And the person wanted to debate with the physicians and say, in that circumstance, it's not a debate. It's not a...
Yeah, because now you're withholding care from other patients because
Right.
they're in that room.
Right.
That's tough,
It's
though.
unethical to continue in that. There at that point, what I say in the hospital room is you are not extending life. You are prolonging death.
Yeah.
And you are causing suffering for a loved one, which is just cruel. But beyond that, to sort of throw a wrench in it, the family member who was a person of faith and was saying, well, God's gonna come through.
Yeah.
I tell you, God does not need us to buy time, right? God doesn't need like an extra round of CPR if God's gonna. And I've seen miraculous things that are unexplained. Yeah, you cannot explain them with science. But more often than not, which is what the physician's saying. Every other case that I have seen like this ends in this way. All of the data says this. This is the scenario that we're in. And at that point, there were a lot of other reasons why the physician wasn't going to continue on, but it was not a debatable thing.
Because then even then, it's like the quality of life after, if you're at that point, like what's the quality of life on the other end?
Right, and each person can only an individual can determine that for themselves.
That's true.
Right?
Yeah. As soon as I said it and I saw your face, I'm like, okay, yeah. There's different people will judge a quality of life. Like, hey, if I'm able to kind of, maybe I might be confined to a wheelchair and have no mobility below the neck, but I'm still able to take in.
Right. If we had like a blanket statement that said, hey, if you're going to be in a long-term care facility, and we don't want to do that anymore as a nation. If we just said, hey, because I personally believe that that's not a good quality of life, we're just not going to do that anymore, we'd have some major problems, right?
Yeah.
In our nation, specifically the West, we're huge on autonomy. Like that's our number one value. If we were in Asia, the greater good would be a bigger conversation. The cost to the family and to society as a whole becomes a much larger piece of the discussion. In the United States, it's like autonomy is number one at all costs.
Yeah.
Which may or may not be right, but
either
way, that is our values. That is our ethos, right? We say autonomy is our number one ethical principle that we're going to follow. And so my thing is honoring the person's wishes, but helping them to see the reality. Pardon me.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the big thing. Like trying to, give people what they genuinely feel is the best for them, but also advise them on that. So we're making the best decisions we can instead of just shooting from the hip, I guess.
Right. It would be. I mean, that's what. Informed patient care is knowing the outcomes. Like you said, some people say, I don't ever want to be intubated. I don't ever want chest compressions. I don't want any of those measures. And only that individual can determine that's what's best for me. That's the value that they have, and how they see it. I don't think that there isn't a right and a wrong. There are some people who are like, all systems go to the very end, no matter what. Trach me, stick me in a long-term care facility, and I could spend years and years there. To each their own on what they see as quality of life. My biggest thing, when I'm in that space, is not to convince anybody of anything. It's to listen first and foremost, and also to help inform and make sure that they're getting the right information. Make sure that they're not being given crazy promises, or they just have factually inaccurate things that's there.
Yeah, that's a psychologist side of you, because you have to listen, and you can't necessarily be providing answers. You kind of provide more questions, so then the person can figure out the answers for themselves. Because I guess if you want to be a psychologist, but you want to give people answers, maybe you should be like a motivational speaker or a life coach or something like that, right?
Right. And even then, I mean, a good coach isn't gonna just provide the answers. I mean, that's kind of a low level manager way of approaching any of those disciplines, whether it's executive or life coaching or psychology or social work, any of those. None of those professions ought to be in the business of giving answers.
Yeah.
And I try and do the wise sage minister thing. When people ask me questions, I'll usually ask them a question in response.
Answer it with the question.
Yeah.
How do you feel about assisted suicide?
So that's a topic that I usually will pick as the main topic of conversation for my class when I'm teaching biomedical ethics, because it's one that's hot topic, and also one that changes frequently. We have several states where physician-assisted suicide is legal, and it's legal in many parts of the world. And there are people who can travel. A place like you can travel to Oregon and receive physician-assisted suicide. That is one that is
Also known as death with dignity.
right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And usually that's what those, sometimes we will use that language better, because it's a more passive language. There's a reason for it.
Yeah.
When I do, instead of saying do not resuscitate, we say allow natural death.
Ooh, okay.
For the same reasons, because words matter, and
And
what
it
we're
also
saying
spells
about it.
and.
Yeah.
And then dot,
Instead
dot.
of
What's
DNR.
next,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. So physician-assisted suicide, or death with dignity, there's a lot of arguments that actually, like, both sides of that debate
Yeah.
use the same argument, right? They'll say the dignity for a person, yeah, but the dignity for a person is one of those ones that's not super black and white. One of the strongest arguments that comes up with physician-assisted suicide that says we ought not legalize it is, if we are saying this quality of life deserves, or we're going to allow somebody to take their own life or have a physician assisted in that process. When somebody's quality of life is this, we're saying a lot about that quality of life. So if somebody gets there and they say, well, what does that say about me? Because I want to continue living. What does it say? Because whether you want to think about it or not, that you're utilizing resources if you continue living, and some of those are financial resources
Definitely.
that's a great cost on your family, and people pretend like they're not going to talk about that when it comes to
No, there's lots of financial. That's the main motivating factor a lot of times.
Right, for a lot of them. But I think for those who are losing certain abilities, who it says something about how we see them. If we say, yeah, it totally makes sense for a person who has lost mobility or has lost X, Y, and Z, whatever it is, we're saying something about that. If we're saying, yes, it's legal if this, and this, but not legal here, right? What about those who decide not to partake of?
And then if you get insurance involved, they're like, well, we have these cases over here where these people don't, say this isn't a quality of life they want out, so we're going to start lobbying to.
Well, and
that can happen.
Who's to say where that line is where I think is the most difficult thing about it is, the argument of, what about mental suffering? What about what about emotional distress? When I worked private practice, I worked in a community counseling center for a little while. There were some folks who their quality of life because of their mental health was really, really low. I mean, it would be pretty hard to argue that I know better on behalf of them because mental illness is different than physical illness.
Yeah.
It would be pretty hard to argue their quality of life is, they voice it as very, very low. I, as an observer, would say, yeah, their quality of life, I mean, based on their own words, is really, really hard.
I think that was a case in Europe recently where some lady was just like, I'm just depressed. Like she had gone through years and years of clinical depression, and it was documented, and she's like, yo, tap out, I'm out. And that was a big case that, kind of shook everything, where it's like, speaking what you're on, speaking on like the mental stability. I
think so. If we're talking about an older adult who has a terminal illness, somebody's got cancer and is going to suffer for the last year of life, it's really easy for people to kind of go, yeah, that totally makes sense. Like, on first glance, when people start looking at cases where there's, a 26-year-old who's married and has kids and says, yeah, I don't want to go through all the indignity of this disease. I can't remember the one in Oregon. There was one recently that I think she was 26, 28. And I can't remember, it might've been Lou Gehrig's, ALS, something similar. Where and those are awful. I mean, absolutely.
Yeah, 100% kill rate, right?
I mean, they are awful, and the quality of life as it depletes is horrifying. It is cruel way to die.
Yeah.
But where do you say, these symptoms are coming on? At what point in that do you say, okay, I'm going to go ahead and now's the time?
Mm-hmm.
So it's the cases that are not
As defined.
right. It's those ones, right? It's easier if it's somebody who's an older adult who has a terminal illness than it is if it's somebody who's young and vibrant. It just is. That's not an ageist statement. It's different because of the life stage that they're in. It's different if somebody has ALS. Like I fully get why somebody who has ALS would consider that as an option. But I also know people who have ALS who have chosen not to.
Try it out.
And they have incredible amount of dignity, and they have an incredible amount of impact to continue offering the world.
Yeah, I think that's a huge thing to consider is when somebody, when you say like whose decision is it? Well, it has to be the person going through it. Ultimately, it's their decision to do it because it's their body. What greater free will is there than to essentially end your own life? Again, suicide is very looked down upon when you're religious, whatnot, and for obvious reasons. It just messes up all the loved ones close to you, anyways.
Right.
But there's something to be said about the people that choose to live till the very end, till they can't, through a terminal illness. And when they are just like a positive force, like they're like, yo, I'm on my way out, but I'm going to try and be as positive as possible and make as big of an impact to my loved ones and community while I'm here. And it's like, dude, that guy, that woman knows they're on their way out, and look at them and how they're carrying themselves and what they're still pushing to try and do and accomplish, and just leave the world a better place than when they left, than when they came in, than when they left. And there's something like just gives you chills to see that. It's like, again, that person's on the way out. You have all all the power in you to just crawl into your bed, hide under your covers, and just ride it out. But they choose to still fight and be a person.
Right. And there's an incredible amount of dignity that's in that, in honoring life. Mm-hmm. And there's something to be said, religious or not, suffering is a crucible of sorts, and it refines us. Mm-hmm. And for people who are religious, there's all kinds of things that can play into that. But regardless, the human experience of suffering forms us. It shapes us.
It does. And
it changes our way of interacting with the world, and it changes those who observe it. It changes their way of interacting with the world. Though, like you said, if you're watching somebody that's doing that, it shows you something about life. It teaches you something about the sacredness of mm-hmm. the body, and there's something that's there. So I know that I skirted the question overall because it's
it's not black and white.
It's incredibly complex.
Well, that's why I don't like people that just view every situation as black and white. There's a right and a wrong answer.
Right.
I don't like that.
So I ultimately fall into the category of autonomy because of my own worldview bias, is that autonomy is the sacred
is the one
principle. So I tend to fall toward the autonomy. Where we go with law and what we do with law, to me is not this. I'm not as concerned. I'm really not. There's a lot of things that I do that if I had to choose between following the law and following ethics, which I've been in those predicaments.
Yeah.
I'm going to choose ethics.
Yeah, well, I mean, how many laws have there been that aren't ethical? So what is law doesn't necessarily mean it's ethical.
Right. And so I think when it comes to that is should it be legalized or should it be illegal? I'm not as concerned with that as I am helping folks to walk through that in their journey, right? I want to sojourn with them in that journey, and where they land, because I place such a high value on autonomy, I'm going to walk with somebody to the end. I can see both sides pretty strongly on it. I think the biggest thing is both sides would serve them well to think more about it from the other position, to think more by putting their putting their feet in the other's shoes, that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's a big thing in a debate. Like, that's a big question. Is like, yeah, you can get into a debate and a talk and conversation and shore up your own defenses, but how about this? Try to defend the point you're trying to take down.
Right.
Yeah. All right. I guess we might end it right there, Tom. It's getting late. We got to pick up our kids, or I do at least.
Yeah.
4:30, man. Flew by.
You did it.
I think I was like a good hour and a half, man.
Cool.
Yeah, that was dope. I definitely want to do this again.
Okay.
Thank you for sitting in and being vulnerable.
Yeah.
Made me cry, you SOB. I appreciate it. You're a beautiful man. I appreciate you coming on, letting people know a little bit about the work and how they could get involved if they would choose. And I will take this second to also let people know that they need to join us on what's it called? What's the app? The
You can go for F3Nation.com.
F3 Nation. Let's get healthy. Let's come out,
Slack
work out.
is the app.
Slack, and then what's the other? Meetup, right?
Meetup. Yeah, we are on Meetup there.
Meetup. So wherever you're listening, I'm sure there's an F3 faction in your area.
That's true.
Just get up and get out. It's all done outside. It's free, and rain or shine, you're getting it in. And it's usually it's a good group of guys, man. I mean, like I've yet to meet somebody I don't like out there, because we're all out there trying to improve ourselves.
Yeah.
So please, guys, get active, seek out some male bros, and talk about your emotions. Anything else you want to tell the people, Tom?
No, this has been great. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Dude, thank you. All right, guys. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll catch you guys next time. All right, later.